I want to preface this video by stating that this is not an invitation to proselytize. I will not appreciate nor accept any blessings from Christians, Muslims, etc. I don't want you to try to convert me or save me, because you're not converting me or saving me to anything except your own blind faith. And that is what you call it. You have to have blind faith. You just got to believe. You don't have to have proof. And there is no proof. So you must indeed be blind. So don't try. I will delete your messages. If you want to say, I wish the best for you, that's fine. But I do not want to hear a whiff of religious nonsense. So please don't. Thank you. I was just watching a video by a young lady named Christy Burke, who for a few years in her life had become the golden child of the family. She had fully embraced her Christian faith at a time when her parents were kind of wishy-washy about it. And somehow that caused them to be more committed. And then when she turned 18, things just went in a different direction. She lost her faith or began to doubt or something. And you should just watch the video on your own. It's on her channel, Christy, Kristi, Burke, Burke. And I'll tell you the name of the video. It is called My Story of Religious Trauma, and then there's a bar, a Christian Intervention. I've heard worse stories than this one, but this is an example of people being so concerned about a loved one that they behave like they're possessed. They behave in unethical, unchristian ways, and they break the law. I feel fortunate that I did not experience that while I was of the faith, because I would have been as traumatized and upset as many of the atheists that I see, ranting online and tearing apart religion. And they're right to do so, because religion is a bunch of nonsense. And while I appreciate that religions have done some good, religions have also been responsible for some of the worst atrocities in history. And I won't list them, because you can do your own research if you have an open mind to finding out the truth. Now, again, I was not traumatized when I was a Christian. My grandfather was a Christian minister, and so was my uncle. Slightly different sex, but my other family members were all involved in the church except for my mom. And then my dad eventually became an atheist, and he called me and he apologized for having proselytized me after I had come out in my 20s as not being a Christian. I wish all of them had done that. I had a wonderful conversation with my aunt, my uncle's wife. My uncle was already dead by that time, in which we talked about religion freely and honestly, and it was a lovely experience. But I had a lot of pressure from Christian family and friends to let them save me. I won't say that my experience was the worst. I did have... No, my heart's fine. My underarm is itchy. I've got a bit of a rash. All this keeping my arm down and stuff, I guess. Early on in my siblings' rebirth into Christianity, she and her then husband, or still husband, had made some very brash statements accusing my father and his wife of not being true Christians, and it was very offensive to my dad. Eventually, they did recant. They apologized, which was a good move. But they were in a Christian sect that was very fundamentalist. They still are, but they seem to have eased off. And my sister has become a lot gentler in her Christian faith. Of course, she's always been kind of a gentle person, but once she backed off of the fanaticism, it was easier to talk to her, and it's gotten easier. There were some wounds that she was bearing that mostly were not because of me, that have, I think, now healed. And that's good because I love her. And happily, she doesn't push me about religion. We have conversations sometimes, but she doesn't argue with me anymore. She knows she's wasting her time, I guess. But some of my family members don't stop. One of them who I love very, very much, I had a very bad experience. I already made a video about that last year because it happened last year. A very Christian-based, un-Christian experience because my children and I made some mistakes. And they invited some of their children over for, I think, what was supposed to be an intervention for us. And that did not go off well because I knew my children weren't comfortable with it. My daughter isn't a Christian. She's a Muslim, and my son and I are deists. So I went and asked my son, do you want to be part of this? Are you comfortable with this? And he said, no. And I said, okay, stay here in the bedroom. And then I went and I said, Jasmine, can I talk to you for a minute? And I took her in the bedroom and I asked her the same question. She said no. So I took both of the children downstairs to the family room because they were upstairs in the living room having their little Christian nonsense. And afterwards, I was verbally accosted by one of them, one of the family member whose house we were staying at. Accused of being a bad father, accused of being disrespectful because I hadn't allowed my children to stay there and talk about Jesus with them. And I said, look, they had told me on a previous occasion that they weren't comfortable with it. And when I pulled them into the bedroom and asked them, they said they weren't comfortable. So I took them downstairs because you were doing something that made them unhappy. And boy, when I turned the tables on that person and said, you're being really disrespectful. I have repeatedly told you guys, I don't want to be proselytized. And you're disrespecting my wishes. And this person didn't care. They were right in my face about it and totally did not acknowledge that they were being disrespectful. And that was sad, but not really surprising because this individual is, yeah. So they just doubled down, and then they tripled down. And then in the morning, they apologized and said, I'm sorry for the way I spoke to you last night. But. So the first insult was, but. Because they had already hammered home what they were upset about. The second insult was that they did not apologize for calling me a bad father. Before we left, they went to church, and before we left, my children and I all wrote letters of apology for the mistakes we had made, not for being non-Christians, not for not joining them with their little Christian voodoo, but for the mistakes we had made that had upset them. And then later I got a message from one of them saying, hey, all is forgiven, but no apology for the insults and for violating once again my sovereign right not to be proselytized. And this is something that has been going on with this particular couple for a long time. I tell them, they lay off a little bit for a while, and then they just start doing it again because they can't help themselves. They just think everyone's got to be saved. And I told the person that I was talking to, I said, look, I don't believe in hell, and I don't believe in Jesus. Jesus was just a man, not the Father, or not the triumvirate, not the Son of God. I mean, there are parts of the Bible where it does say the Son of Man, not the Son of God. So, but it's nonsense. But that wasn't even the worst that I experienced post departure from religion. And I continue to experience. And I did a video about this a long time ago after I escaped Indonesia after my wife had died, because my Indonesian family, or my wife's Indonesian family, some of them, including my mother-in-law, were persecuting me after my wife's death. They were trying to get me deported and blacklisted so they could take my children away from me. And that gave me PTSD and paranoia and depression, especially when I found out that my brother-in-law was looking for an assassin. And the police buried the report that I submitted with proof. Because my father-in-law, who was deceased at that time, had been a high-ranking police officer, a brigadier general, because they use military names there. So they still had lots of contacts within the police world. Yeah, so that was not fun. And at the time, that caused a lot of trauma, not just for me, but for my children. A lot of anger. My son was angry at them and angry at Islam. And my daughter was angry at me. After a while, she went from being happy that we were out of the country to being angry at me for taking her out of the country when I was just protecting her, because her family was being irrational and dangerous, trying to steal them away. And, it's even after I've come back, when I post things that are controversial on, say, LinkedIn, and mostly LinkedIn, and a little bit on here, but not so much because I clamped down on it very fast. So it can't really take root. Because I know that would give me a lot of comments, but it would also create a lot of drama. And I would prefer not to have a big channel and not have drama, rather than people getting dragged into all that drama and traumatization and pain. Is it the right choice? I believe so. Is it costing me money? Well, the channel isn't monetized, is it? So yeah, it's costing me money. But money isn't the most important thing in the world, unless you are obsessed, like Musk and Trump and Gates and Zuckerberg and Bezos and all those other bozos who can never be satisfied with what they've got and have to keep on taking more and more and more from the rest of us. But I digress. So, recently, you may have seen, before I took it down, my video, or maybe even my LinkedIn post about how Musk did not do a Nazi salute. And based on the context, based on the gestures, and based on what he said explaining his gestures, it was not a Nazi salute. Now, it does bear something of a resemblance in certain parts of it, the gesture, to a Nazi salute. not so much the originating Mussolini fascist salute. In fact, almost not at all, really. But there's enough evidence to say it's not a Nazi salute. And I got a lot of flack for that. I got a lot of flack from the left. I got a lot of flack from the people who are angry that Trump is president. I'm angry that Trump is president. And these people were attacking me. So I revised my post to try and make it clear. I got upset too because people were attacking me. People were libeling me. I always get it mixed up. Slander is spoken. Libel is I figured out a way to think of it, but slander is spoken. Anyways, I revised my post over and over and over again, providing more information, providing clarification because people were misunderstanding. They were misunderstanding me. And, of course, that only helped with the new people that were coming along. And some people were like, thank you, you're right. Thank you for pointing this out. Thank you for, being fair and blah, blah, blah. And there were people who were like, there's lots of proof that you're wrong. And I said, okay, show me the proof. And a couple of them showed me pictures, which doesn't help because a picture is a tiny moment in time, which has no context and can be interpreted any darned way you want. I've seen it. I've seen pictures that were of something completely different, and they are reposted onto the internet. Old pictures claiming this is what happened, this is what this is about, and it was not. It had nothing to do with it. I mean, all I had to do was do a search on Google or TinEye to find the original message, the source, and find out the truth. But again, I digress. I digress a lot. I have a lot of short tracks going off the train track, the main track, and then I have a hard time finding the way back onto the track. But yeah, there were left side Christians who were haranguing me and accusing me and libeling me. And some of them were being reasonable, and I said, okay, show me the proof. And finally, somebody showed me this video of, actually a picture. And the picture showed the Tesla factory, and I think it was Germany. And to the left of the word Tesla, it said Heil. Which I was like, and to the left of that was a big picture of Elon Musk doing his gesture, which is kind of like something like that. I can't copy it because I'm not feeling ecstatic and at the same time energized and all that stuff that all you can see from that full gesture. Because yeah, Musk was definitely ecstatic. And there was some weird lighting going on. I was like, there's no context. It's clear that those pictures were added somehow and were not put onto the picture, onto the building permanently or directly. And sure enough, it turned out some activists had been using a projector to project a video about Musk and his far-right activities in Europe because he has been supporting fascists and Nazis in Europe in various countries, not just Germany, but Austria and some other countries as well, including the UK. He is the world's richest man, and he's taking advantage of his wealth and power to try to upend the political spectrum in Europe. I'm sorry, but that should be illegal. I mean, it's bad enough that he came out of South Africa, which still has a strong Nazi or fascist presence, and was allowed to become an American citizen. That was a big mistake. So, ultimately, I decided that It didn't matter what his intent was. He's either a fascist or a Nazi. And no, they are not identical. Look it up. Nazism has aspects of fascism in it, but it is not the same thing. So I revised my statement yet again. And then Christians on the right side started attacking me. It's like, what the heck? I can't win for losing. It was like, okay, first of all, again, I grew up as a Christian, and I was taught one of the more loving variants of Christianity. And when I say variants, that's because I'm not talking about the sect in particular, but I'm talking about my exposure to Christianity, including a couple of retreats that I went to, and some other stuff. So my overall education in Christianity was much more about the loving side of Jesus than anything else. And I have happy memories of being a little boy with my sister sitting on the floor listening to old Christian records of different parts of the Bible. We had our favorites. Daniel and the Lion's Den, I think it was, and David and Goliath, and there were a couple others. They were very nicely done and very enjoyable to listen to. No pictures? Oh my God, was that a podcast? No, there were no podcasts back then. Podcast is Apple, okay? Please stop saying podcast. They're audio programs. Anyways, I digress again. So, I was being traumatized on LinkedIn last week about that by Christians on both sides. I feel lucky that I did not experience the traumatizations that other people felt. And here's, it's interesting. If you watch Christy Burke's video about her traumatic experience with her family and church members, some of whom had been duped into going to that intervention, I experienced something kind of like that. When I was in Indonesia, periodically, members of the family would try to pressure me. Because when I had married my wife, I had been studying Islam, and I said I was a Muslim. And I told my wife up front, I said, look, I'm studying Islam, but if I don't believe that God has called me to it, I'm not going to stay in Islam. And she accepted that. And we had an agreement that we would not force our religious beliefs on our kids. And I didn't, but her mom did. And, of course, her mom wasn't part of the deal. And when I finally came out to my Indonesian family that I was not a Muslim anymore, the response was not happy, but they accepted it. But first my father-in-law died. He had a major stroke, second stroke, and that really sucked. I liked him. And then that was shortly after they had gone to Mecca on their first and only pilgrimage. And then after that, my mother-in-law became increasingly religious and manipulative. And as my wife was declining, she became more concerned about my wife's soul and less concerned about her physical well-being. And it became ugly. And she and her other people that were family and friends were psychologically manipulating my wife. And they were doing all this behind my back. They were also manipulating my children. I didn't find out until after my wife's death what had really been going on. And boy, oh boy, that just knocked me flat and flattened me because I really, really, really loved my mother in law so much. Unfortunately, my culture, my ethos, did not meld well with the Javanese Muslim ethos and belief system and stuff. And it wasn't just about Islam, it was more so just Javanese culture is very important to the Javanese, as in most cultures that are still intact, I guess you could say. The culture is actually many times more important than the religion. And I say this having seen this over and over again in different situations where, for example, the Javanese, their previous religion was one of their previous religions that survived the Buddhists and the Hindus and the Muslims and the Christians was animism, and it was a type of animism called Kajawan. And my mother-in-law and her family still practiced aspects of it, and it had nothing to do with Islam. They seemed to think so, but it didn't. It was all from Kajawan. It's very interesting, but not Islamic. So yeah, I feel very lucky. But I think the two worst other experiences I had at the hands of my wife's family was, number one, we were at the hospital. We had gone to a provincial hospital in Yogyakarta for more advanced treatment than the local cancer hospital could handle and could not handle. I told my family that I was going to go home and I had to take care of the cat and I had to take care of some other things, and then I was going to come back. And I said, can somebody please drive me? And nobody would drive me to the train station. I mean, they wouldn't allow me to do that. I was like, look, I will come right back. I just need to do this. I'll be back in 1 or maybe 2 days. And then I had this big confrontation with my brother-in-law, who sometimes was very, very much an egotistical jerk, in which he was very close to beating me down. I don't really remember why anymore. It doesn't matter. He was in the wrong. He was being very rude. He was younger than me, but because he was my wife's older brother, he felt that he had the right to, treat me like a little brother. And yet he never showed me the respect he was supposed to according to his culture. Sorry, my baldness needs some protection. So, ultimately, I had to catch public transportation to get to the train station, go home, and then I was told, I called my wife and I was told, don't come back. So apparently what they had been doing is, after I left without their permission as an adult who was in his 40s, late 40s, they decided they weren't going to have me around and that my mother-in-law was going to take care of my wife. And I knew from having done it from 2017, 2014, this was 2016, I guess. No, 2016. I believe it was. But 2015. I knew that she was, already fairly old, like older than me now, in her 60s. And I knew she didn't have the stamina for it. She had hypothyroidism, I think it was, and she had a few other issues. And I knew that she just didn't have the physical ability anymore. But my wife said, no, just stay there. And but after a week or so, my wife called me up and said, please come. My mom's getting sick and she can't handle taking care of me. So I went back. And I stayed with my wife and stayed with my wife and back home and back to the hospital, back home, back to the hospital. And then in 2016, we were at the hospital again, and my wife was just not doing well. Before she could lose her hair, she had our neighbor who had a little salon cut off all of her hair. And her eyebrows fell out, and she didn't have any hair anywhere. And that was mostly the chemo. And we didn't know she was stage 4 at that time. And so we were in the hospital in Jogja, or Yogya, which is funny because, well, it doesn't matter. It's not relevant. I had been out. I think I was looking for food for my wife. And I came into the room, and there was my mother-in-law, my brother-in-law, and many of the aunts and uncles. And I was like, uh-oh. None of them were smiling or greeting me or hugging me or whatever. They were all standing in a big circle. Sound familiar? And I don't even remember what exactly they said so much as they were being very condemning of me. And they said that she had to be moved out of the hospital, that the hospital was releasing her, and they were not going to help me find a place for us to stay, that I had to do it all alone. I've been doing most of the stuff for my wife all alone anyways. So it's like, okay. I walked out after they had been done. They had done berating me and treating me like crap. And I found a place and got her moved over there. And then, because of what had happened months before, well, almost a year before, when my brother-in-law had been ready to hurt me, he was still angry at me because, see, my brother-in-law had such a big ego that even when he was wrong, he could never admit it. I had to apologize to him as the older person. And so my mother-in-law said, please apologize to him. Aji was his nickname. And I said, no, I'm not going to. I've apologized to him before when he was wrong and I was right. It's not right, and I'm not going to do it again. And then a couple of aunts came over, and my mother-in-law tried again. I kept on saying, no, I am not apologizing. And finally, to get away from them, I went into our hotel room. And I was talking to my wife and sitting there, and I was upset. And one or two members of the family, I think, were in there, and they left. And then my brother-in-law came in with a couple of other family members, and he started to apologize to me. And then he just invalidated his apology by what he said after that. But rather than being righteous, I accepted the apology, even though it was invalid. And we hugged, and I cried, and I said that's all I wanted was an apology. And we were okay for a while after that. We were okay until my wife was very, very sick. I mean, like, she was in the high care unit, which is basically like palliatively. It's basically like palliative care. But after they all left finally, which was such a relief, I started crying, and I went into the bathroom, and I came back out, and my wife and I talked, and she said that when she got well, we would go and move to another island in Kalimantan, which was then being destroyed by the government as well as by corporations that were tearing down the forests and killing all the animals in order to make palm tree and coconut plantations. And if you don't know anything about that industry, the people who actually harvest the coconuts and harvest the palm fruits, they get paid almost nothing. So whatever you're paying for your coconut and palm, those people live on very little. They do not have proper safety equipment to climb up the trees. And if they fall because they are independent, they get no help from the corporation that is benefiting from their hard work because they're independent farmers. And it's a very hard life. So she said we would move to Kalimantan because that would be the easiest way to get away from her family. And, I believe she wanted to do that because on previous occasions when I didn't listen. Previous occasions, she had stated that she did not want to live near her family. And there were some times when, especially my mother-in-law's youngest brother would come visiting suddenly without announcing themselves. We would hide in our home that we rented, not answer our phones, turn off the sound, and wait and wait and wait until they left. Which was, at that time, our relationship with them was not very good. And her uncle was kind of a two-faced. I guess I'll say that. He was saying bad things about me behind my back, and in front of me, he was being nice. And he was kind of a jerk. But that was kind of a family thing too. He got better over the years, though, but not when my wife died. Man, that was hard. So we made an agreement that once my wife got well enough, we would move to Kalimantan. Of course, that never happened. And my wife had indicated to me several times she didn't want to, as I said, be near her family. But I never listened. I moved her closer instead of keeping her away. I should have listened. Oh, I didn't understand. I didn't understand the family dynamics, the problems in the family, the manipulation and stuff that went on in this once upon a time royal family. They were descended from concubines of two different empires, the Mojopahit and the Mataram empires of Java. I remember one time we needed an ambulance to move my wife, and my brother-in-law was angry at me about it. He had assumed that I was not going to do anything, and I was the one who was always arranging transportation because we had the help of 3 or 4 different charities that would, one or the other of them would always have a vehicle available to drive us to a hospital. And that was great. They didn't charge us anything. Sometimes there was a place for us to stay and some food to eat. Sometimes they gave us some money. And that was wonderful. There were some very good people helping us out. Not so much the family. Mostly strangers. Sorry, I don't know why that struck me so strongly. Yeah. So he was giving me a hard time, and I said, I've already arranged the ambulance. He was like, oh, great. It's like, you jerk. And when my wife died, now you have to understand, when my wife was in the high care unit, my mother-in-law and I were at the hospital talking outside of the high care unit because it was supposed to be restricted access. The nurses were not good about restricting access to us. But we were talking about funeral arrangements. Funerals are very different there from here, but you still get buried. And I explained to her that it was my wife's wish to be donated to science or medicine. And she said, I don't believe that. She never told me that. And I didn't want to argue with my mother-in-law. I didn't know at that time the bad things she was doing behind my back, like going to government officials and lying about me so she could get me deported. So rather than argue with her about something that was my right to determine, because it was based on what my wife told me, I said, okay, if you want to bury her in the family plot of the cemetery in your village, okay. That was, fight avoided. Well, that fight anyways. And then after we got to my mother-in-law's village with my wife's body and my children, and it was time for the funeral, some strange things happened. So, for example, nobody in my mother-in-law's family contacted my father-in-law's family. Again, he was deceased, but nobody told them that my wife was dead. And I called them up, and they were just shocked. And I said, please, let them know, because I don't have all the phone numbers. And I was shocked. And when it came time for the funeral, you would think, as the husband, that I would be allowed to walk next to my wife's. It's not really a coffin. It's more like, there's a plank or a couple of planks in a metal frame, and there are carrying handles on either end, long poles, so that you can get two people on each pole on each. So there are 2, 4, 6, 8 people. And if you need more people because the person is really fat, which doesn't happen so much in the villages as it does in the cities where there are a lot more fat people, you can. And then there is a metal frame that doesn't fold it. It turns over on top of to cover the corpse, and they put a green cloth over that has some Islamic stuff on it. And I was told I couldn't walk with that. So I stood on the porch waiting. And finally, as they started to walk away, my mother-in-law signals to me that I can follow behind. So I'm way behind it. I was like, well, at least I get to go. And I was not able to be involved directly in the funeral. And that week was when things started to fall apart with my fat wife's family in a way that I could see. Because my daughter mentioned to me that my uncle had said, hey, you can stay here. You don't have to go back, because my best friend, or our best friend, was coming to pick us up, take us home. He was concerned about us because he was a Chinese Indonesian, and he knows how the Javanese people are. I didn't believe him, and he was completely right. And he came and he grabbed us, and we were starting to walk away drive away when my daughter said that, and I said, "Stop!" So, and my best friend, thank you, Yudi, tried to convince me, to get me to realize that this was a bad thing, that something bad was going to happen. But I just did not know how bad things had been behind the scenes. I had this much of an understanding That's how much was not, the rest of it was not transparent to me. So I said, okay, go to your uncle and ask him if the offer still stands. If it does, then you and your brother can stay at their house. And she had told me that he had said he would bring me back. I don't remember if it was 1 day or 2 days later. So she checked. He said yes. They went off against the protests of my best friend. We went back to Purwokerto. And on the date that my kids were supposed to come back, they didn't show up with my brother-in-law. And I called, and he was extremely rude to me. It was 2 or 3 days after that my kids were finally brought home to me. And my mother-in-law said, I want to ask permission if I'm still allowed to come and visit you here in your house. And I said, of course, because I didn't know what was going on. Now, there had been a point shortly before my wife's death where my daughter had come to me and said, Papa, Grandma is saying bad things about you. And I said, it's because she's traumatized. She's scared for her daughter, and she loves her. And just forgive her. Please forgive her. That was one of the few things that I knew that my mother-in-law had done. So I said, of course you can come and visit. Why wouldn't you? You're always welcome here. If I had known. Had I known, I would have forbidden her to ever set foot on that property again. Because that property technically was owned by my children. It was paid for by her. It was put in my children's names because it couldn't be put into my wife's name because she was married to a foreigner. Me. That's Indonesian law. If you're a woman married to a foreigner, you cannot own land. If you're a man married to a foreigner, you can. Patriarchy! So it wasn't until I decided to flee after I started finding out about the assassin and some of the other things that were going on. And as we were riding the train to Jakarta the first time, my kids told me how my mother-in-law behind my back had been pressuring my wife, which I had found out as my wife was dying in the high care unit, or when my wife was being transferred to the high care unit. One of the other things that I knew was that she told me that her family had been pressuring her and that I had to become Javanese. I was like, I can't do that. And they will not be satisfied with that. That not become, but act Javanese. And that if I do that, they will not be satisfied until I also become a Muslim again. And I can't pretend to be a Muslim. I cannot do that. I cannot live a false life. So she said, if you can't do that, then we can't be together. My wife. And I was crying. And I think she was too weak and lacking in energy to cry. But she was patting my head. And I said, I always knew this was going to happen. I always knew that it was going to end. And don't get me wrong, I'm not blameless. I made many, many mistakes. I should never have gotten married. That's the truth. And I've had women ask to marry me, even knowing that I carry HPV most likely. And between the HPV and my doubts about my ability to be a good husband, I have said no to all of them. Most of them I wasn't interested in anyways. I mean, some of them were very pretty, but I had offers of sex, I had offers of love, I had offers of marriage, not necessarily all combined, and I said no. I can't see some other woman go through what my wife went through because of the virus turning her cells into cancer and killing her because of hypoglycemia technically, but she was also stage 4, so she was going to die anyways. She was really far gone. the last few days of her life were, yeah. So as we're traveling on the train to Jakarta to try to escape, which, by the way, did not happen, my children start to tell me about how my mother-in-law and some other family members had been manipulating my wife until she finally gave in to give me an ultimatum. Either you convert your behavior or we can't be together anymore. And apparently there's some aspect of Islam and Christianity as well where you can do that. You can force people to do things like that. I mean, there are plenty of stories of Christians doing the same kind of nonsense. And I was just one of the big reasons that I had decided to try and escape to Jakarta in that month that my wife died was because it wasn't just about the assassin. It was also about the fact that I discovered why my children had been held in my mother-in-law's village for several days instead of being returned as on the date promised. The day after I left, which would be on Monday, they took my children to the local immigration office, which was in a different village, and they lied to one of the higher ups, not top dog, but one of the sectional chiefs, about me. They said I had abandoned my family a few times, which was actually I had been on a trip for a few days to another city to do work as an English teacher. And they accused me of having stolen all of my mother-in-law's and my wife's gold jewelry. But in fact, I had come home one day and they called me into the bedroom and they showed me all this gold jewelry that I didn't even know existed. And they knew that I was going to have to go to Singapore. This was years before before I got permanent residency. And I had to go there to get a new visa, either for visit visa or a work visa. And they knew that I wanted to get a camera. And so they said, here, take this gold, sell it in Singapore, and then you can use it to buy your camera. And my brother-in-law had offered me some Canon lenses that he had, and his camera had been stolen, but he still had the lenses. And I said, no, I'm getting a Nikon. I should have just gone with the camera the Canon. I mean, because I ended up not getting a Nikon either. I ended up getting a Konica Minolta because I got tricked in by a seller into thinking it was a good buy when they were going under. It broke. I'm not really sure if it was because of my kids handling the camera or it broke because it wasn't good quality. It's still in Indonesia. I should have brought it back and tried to get it fixed. But so they accused me of having stolen all that jewelry that I had been given and a whole bunch of other crazy stuff. And they asked the immigration officer to deport me and blacklist me, which would have given them the right to take my kids into their custody. Fortunately, the immigration officer had the intelligence, if not the ethics, to ask my children, primarily my daughter. Apparently, he did not talk much to my son. He was pretty little. He was like 7, I think, or 8. Yeah, 8. About those allegations, and my daughter denied them because they were false. So he told my wife's family, and they were upset, apparently, that he could not deport me and he could not blacklist me because there was no proof of their allegations. What a good thing. I would have lost my children, and I would never have gotten them back. I'm pretty sure. Yeah, so that was a major impetus for me to try to get the kids out of the country. And after that, every governmental department, from the local one within my community all the way up to immigration, impeded me in every way they could to get my wife's death certificate issued, to get documentation to get myself and my kids out of the country, and so on. Because my mother-in-law had gone to all these people and lied to them about me. And they sided with my mother-in-law because, of course, who's going to disbelieve this little old cute woman? She's a local and he's a non-Muslim white guy. A horrible human being. So, after having my best friend consult with a famous lawyer and being told that I would win in court against the officials and the family, but it would take years, lots of money, and most importantly, periodically I would lose custody of my children, which meant that they would be brainwashed by my wife's family, and I couldn't have that. So I worked and worked and worked and got the documentation that I was told I needed to get. We went back to Jakarta. The immigration person that I had spoken to that said I did not need an exit visa had lied to me. So my children were cleared to go, but obviously they couldn't go without me on a halfway around the world 2-day trip. So we were stuck in the airport. Now, fortunately, we'd gotten there well in advance of our departure time, which was a really good thing. And we sat there, and lunchtime came, and the immigration people were very nice. They gave us lunch for free. That was so nice and really, really appreciated, let me tell you. And then the embassy, whom I had contacted a few times to try and get their help to get out of the country because I was in danger because of my brother-in-law looking for an assassin. We had actually been hiding in a hotel owned by a friend that we knew until we left for Jakarta. The embassy said, I talked to them and they were like, okay, we'll see what we can do to help you get out of the country, because immigration was saying you don't have the exit visa. I said, look, I was in Chilachap. I talked to this guy who was handling the processing our documents, and he said, I don't need that. I can leave. And the guy was like, well, you need it. I said, look, this is the second time I've been here. I've got tickets. I can't go back. They're after me. So finally, my embassy called back, and the guy asks, would you be willing to let them blacklist you so you can get out? I said, yeah, go ahead. Blacklist me forever. I'm not coming back. I've got family members who want to kill me. Go ahead. And so we waited. And finally, the immigration officer in the airport said, you've been cleared to go. And my daughter started crying. She was so relieved. I was so relieved. Oh, I think my son was relieved, but he was a little bit young to understand what was going on. But yeah, we were all relieved. We got on the airplane, and here we are. But yeah, I came here with PTSD. A lot of PTSD. It took me a long time to heal that. I think it's healed. And to forgive my wife's family. I was very, very traumatized. And that's my story about religious persecution, traumatization by both Christians and Muslims. And there's more. I mean, but that's, the broad strokes of it. So I want you religious folks to think very carefully. When you start doing stuff like that, that's abuse. That's manipulation. That is destructive. That is not what God would want. Certainly not what Jesus taught. I'm pretty sure it wasn't what Muhammad taught. But of course, 2 of the 3 holy books of Islam were not from Muhammad because he couldn't write. In fact, the Quran wasn't from Muhammad. But then again, the New Testament wasn't from Jesus. They were all written by other people. But the other 2 books, the Hadiths and the Sunnah, are about other aspects, like Muhammad's life to be used as a role model. And other things that Muhammad had said that didn't go into the Quran or Al-Quran. Buddha wouldn't approve of what the Buddhists are doing to the Rohingya in Myanmar. Yeah. Religion has done good, and I'm pretty sure it's done more evil. I mean, look at how religion is tearing apart America right now. With the fanatical evangelicals becoming the most dangerous existential threat to this nation that I've ever seen. They are an immediate threat to our democracy, along with the oligarchs and the plutarchs, or plutocrats, whichever the one is that's correct. So we have to guard our democracy. But that's another story. But all you fanatical evangelicals out there, you're doing a lot of damage. You are not following Scripture. You are not following what Jesus taught. And Christy Burke did an amazing video talking about the things that evangelical Christians have forgotten. And I'm not talking about all of them. There are some that still behave the right way. But she's absolutely right. The fanatical evangelicals, the Christian nationalists, the Christian militants are not Christians. They have fallen away from the true faith and allowed themselves to be guided by false teachers and false prophets and false leaders. They have been riled up and taught to hate when they should love, taught to demand instead of serve, taught to usurp instead of help unify in a peaceful and loving way in accordance with Jesus' words as related by the disciples. Because again, the New Testament wasn't written by Jesus. We only have the words of other people who claim to be repeating what Jesus taught. And Jesus was just a man. I think I'll stop here. If you've actually made it through the last hour, plus a little bit over, I really appreciate you taking the time to listen to my message. If you are a religious person, I hope you will think very carefully and consider very carefully before you do things that hurt the people you love, because a lot of the time you lose people from the church, from the temple, from the mosque, or whatever, is because of traumatizing, abusive, and even physically and emotionally abusive behavior based on religious fervor, false interpretations, ignorance, and selfishness. Many of the problems that have sprung up from the far left are because of Christians in particular. The whole pushback from the LGBTQ community is because of the intolerance and hatred of Christians. You caused it. If you had just loved and accepted your family members who were LGBTQ, none of that stuff would have happened. This country would be significantly different. You are guilty of having pushed them out of your homes, pushed them out of your families, hurt them, and in some cases even murdered them. You created the Pride March and the wanton clothes that they wear at the Pride March. You created an environment of not just unwelcome, but of hatred and violence against LGBTQ, because you've decided it's your job to judge, be the jury, and the executioner of these people that Jesus did not condemn. And from everything I've been told by multiple sources, the New Testament, where it's in conflict with the Old Testament, overrides the Old Testament. And Jesus definitely had a different message regarding LGBTQ. And yet you hold on to the hatred and rage of the Old Testament, of a false god, and hurt people that love you. Shame on you. You're not being Christianly. You're being demonic. Thanks again for watching, and I hope you have a great day. Thanks for watching. I need to ask for your help. On December 11th, 2024, Amazon fired me under false pretenses, and on the 17th, I had surgery for the injury that occurred at Amazon that Amazon and Sedgwick refused to take responsibility for, so it's coming out of my pocket and my insurance company's pocket. So that means I'm unemployed, and I will not be getting short-term disability from Amazon or from Sedgwick. So my financial situation is a bit of a problem right now. If you would like to help me, there are some things you can do. Number one, you can like, subscribe, share, comment, and turn on notifications on my channels. Number two, if you'd like to give a one-time donation, and please don't do this if you can't afford it, you can, on the Glenn's Fast Reviews channel, do a super thanks. Number three, if you would like to help me on a monthly basis, you can become a member on Glenn's Fast Reviews, and or you can go to patreon.com/GLENNMII and become a member there. Thank you so much for your support.